Marxism explained in 7 minutes. Marxism's initial appeal came from its scope. Karl Marx said his theory explained not only why everything important in history had ever happened, more significantly, it predicted everything important that ever would happen, especially the workers' revolution that would bring history itself to an end with its fulfillment in the perfect socialist state. And amen. It was the 19th century, after all. Big theories were in vogue. Charles Darwin was explaining everything that ever had or ever would happen in nature with his theory of evolution. Marx said history was driven by one thing only, that humans were alienated from their labor and its product. The Greek or Roman aristocrat owned his slaves and their product, just as the capitalist owned the wage workers' industrial output. Now the details. Depending on how advanced the productive technology was at any time, an appropriate method of production would evolve. Tools and methods together, Marx called the infrastructure, the tools of production or the means of production. These would bring about a matching social organization of ruling and working classes, a political system to legitimize and enforce this, and a religion to bless it. Very primitive production, hunting, gathering, produced chiefs and followers and animism. Primitive farming produced landowners and slaves, monarchy, and polytheism. More advanced farming produced feudal lords, serfs, monotheism, and the divine right of kings. And the harnessing of water, fossil fuels, and specialization produced the bourgeoisie, the factory system, capitalism, and wage slavery. It also produced the French Revolution, as France's landed aristocrats were expelled by its vulgar middle-class factory owners. In England, the monarchical Catholic Church gave way to the democratic Protestants as monarchy gave way to a form of representative democracy. Each formulation throughout history Marx called the thesis, which eventually gave birth to an internal contradiction Marx dubbed its antithesis. Okay, he stole the whole thing from Hegel, but turned it on his head, as they like to say in Marxist studies. So the antithesis swallows the thesis and produces a new synthesis. This is Marx's historic dialectic. And then the new synthesis produces its own antithesis, and so on. Capitalism, even as Marx was writing, was producing the working class, or proletariat, which was capitalism's antithesis. One of Marx's iron laws was that capitalists would be driven by competition, by their own internal logic, to reduce wages to the point that they drove the workers to starvation and revolution. Thus, capitalism was the author of its own destruction. For this impoverishment would force the working class to become aware of its own united self-interest and its own power. And then, inevitably, Marx promised, the proletariat would overthrow the bosses and assume ownership of its own labor, resolving the last contradiction. The wastefulness of capitalist competition would then give way to harmony and plenty. Oppression would end, and with it the need for government, the state, the police, and religion. Religion's role in this was to assure the suffering workers that they would be rewarded in heaven for their pain. Meanwhile, the rich would be rewarded in this world, but punished in the afterlife. The overall theory is called dialectic materialism. It didn't work at all at predicting the future, and apart from the French Revolution, it didn't actually match up with the history very well either. The workers of the world were not impoverished, for example. They did not unite. In their name, however, dedicated and ruthless activists did take over Russia and then China, where they murdered upwards of 100 million of their own countrymen to achieve their ends. But that is okay for Marxists, because they do not believe in countries, nor in countrymen. In fact, Marxists do not believe that human beings with rights exist at all as such, unless and until socialism has been achieved. And that is why even people on the right side of history can be killed when necessary. They aren't really people yet, just fighters on one side or the other side of history. The owners of the old factors of production, for example, France's aristocrats, will always resist the march of history expressed by the efforts to take over by the owners of the new factors of production, e.g. middle-class factory owners. The factory owners must likewise resist the workers and their efforts to claim ownership of their labor and its product. They must resist because Marxism acknowledges only one motivation, self-interest. Instead of evil, there is the working class's alienation from the fruits of its labor. But this alienation, like everything else in Marxism, is inevitable, given the technology and method of production at any given time. Instead of good, there is only being on the right side of history. But if it all be inevitable, why should anyone kill anyone else to achieve it? Ask the Mensheviks in Tsarist Russia, for example. Because history needs a push sometimes, replied the Bolsheviks, speaking out of the barrels of their guns. Marxism's perfect socialism obviously resembles and replaces Christianity's promise of a paradise on earth after Christ's second coming, when sin is all washed away, or in this case, when alienation is all washed away. Marxism is therefore sometimes said to be a Christian heresy. How does communism fit into all this? At the theoretical level, communism is the next to last stage before perfect socialism is achieved, but after capitalism is overthrown. At this penultimate stage, the workers are ruled for their own good by a single political party, the Communist Party. This is called communism building socialism. Thanks very much for your attention.